morning of September 29th, 1982, began with the quiet, unremarkable routines of suburban Chicago. In Elk Grove Village, 12-year-old Mary Kellerman awoke complaining of a sore throat and a runny nose. Seeking to ease her daughter's discomfort, her mother gave her a single extra-strength Tylenol capsule. Minutes later, a sudden crash echoed from the bathroom. Mary was found collapsed on the floor, her breathing shallow and erratic. Despite the frantic efforts of paramedics, she was pronounced dead shortly after arriving at the hospital. How does a routine remedy for a common childhood cold transform into an instrument of sudden, inexplicable death? Miles away in Arlington Heights, a parallel tragedy was unfolding with terrifying speed. Adam Janus, a 27-year-old postal worker, suffered a massive fatal collapse in his home later that same day. The suddenness of his death was entirely baffling to emergency responders. As his grieving family gathered at his house to mourn, his brother Stanley and sister-in-law Teresa sought relief from their crushing emotional distress. They each consumed a Tylenol capsule from an open bottle sitting innocuously on Adam's kitchen counter. Before the sun set on that grim Wednesday, both Stanley and Teresa were dead, turning a family's mourning into an unfathomable massacre. Local authorities were suddenly thrust into a nightmare of cascading, unexplained fatalities. According to Cook County medical investigators, the victims exhibited symptoms consistent with catastrophic oxygen deprivation, yet their airways were completely clear and their lungs functioned normally. The initial medical confusion dissipated only when a seasoned toxicologist noted a faint, unmistakable scent hovering near the victims and their extracted blood samples. It was the distinct aroma of bitter almonds. This olfactory signature pointed immediately to a highly lethal agent, potassium cyanide. The lethal dose of cyanide for an average human is roughly 50 milligrams, an amount small enough to fit on the tip of a knife. Forensic analysis of the capsules recovered from the victims' homes revealed a terrifying reality regarding the killer's intent. Each tainted pill contained nearly 65 milligrams of the deadly compound, guaranteeing a swift and brutal demise. The red and white gelatin capsules had been meticulously pulled apart, filled with the lethal white powder, seamlessly reassembled, and placed back into their commercial packaging. Investigators now faced an unprecedented puzzle that required them to decipher the killer's modus operandi, an investigative term meaning method of operation, which refers to the specific techniques a criminal uses to execute their crime. Detectives meticulously traced the lot numbers printed on the deadly bottles recovered from the crime scenes. They discovered that the tainted medication originated from entirely different manufacturing plants across the country. Yet all the fatal doses were purchased in the Chicago metropolitan area over a tightly compressed span of just a few days. This stark geographical concentration led the Federal Bureau of Investigation and local police to a chilling, paradigm-shifting conclusion. The sabotage did not occur at the factory level, nor during the national distribution process. Instead, the perpetrator had acquired the bottles directly from local drugstores and supermarkets. They meticulously laced the capsules with cyanide in a secure, unknown location, and then brazenly returned the deadly packages to the store shelves. The killer had weaponized the mundane, turning random consumer aisles into a lethal lottery. A profound wave of terror washed over Chicago and quickly engulfed the entire nation as news of the poisoned medicine broke. Police cruisers drove slowly through suburban neighborhoods, blaring urgent warnings over loudspeakers, pleading with residents to discard any Tylenol products immediately. Hospitals and poison control centers were inundated with thousands of panicked citizens, fearing they had ingested the poison after experiencing normal aches and pains. Amidst the chaos, the official death toll rose to 7 innocent people, including Mary McFarland, Paula Prince, and Mary Reiner. Johnson & Johnson, the parent company of the manufacturer McNeil Consumer Products, faced an existential corporate crisis alongside the unfolding human tragedy. In a move widely cited in history as the gold standard for crisis management, they initiated an immediate, massive recall of over 31 million bottles of Tylenol nationwide. The financial cost of this operation exceeded $100 million. However, the corporate priority shifted entirely to public safety, aiming to starve the invisible predator of their chosen weapon and prevent further loss of life. With the immediate threat neutralized by the recall, the manhunt became one of the most extensive and complex in American law enforcement history. A massive joint task force comprising the FBI, the Food and Drug Administration, and local Chicago police agencies began sifting through thousands of frantic tips and potential leads. They scoured purchasing records for anyone with recent access to potassium cyanide, a chemical compound commonly used in legitimate industries such as jewelry making, metal extraction, and professional photography. A significant breakthrough appeared to materialize in early October, sending a jolt of adrenaline through the exhausted task force. Johnson & Johnson received a handwritten extortion letter demanding $1 million to stop the Chicago poisonings. Through meticulous forensic document analysis and fingerprinting, the letter was traced to a man named James W. Lewis. He was a tax accountant with a murky, transient past who was currently residing in New York City. Investigators quickly mobilized, believing they had finally cornered the architect of the panic. James W. Lewis instantly became the prime suspect in the eyes of an anxious public and a voracious media. Law enforcement discovered that Lewis had a documented history of erratic behavior and had previously been charged with a violent, unrelated crime in Kansas City, though those charges were ultimately dismissed. He fit the psychological profile of a manipulative opportunist. However, as detectives began to dig deeply into his timeline and movements, the foundational evidence of the murder case against him began to severely fracture. Investigators were forced to confront the stark limitations of circumstantial evidence, a legal term referring to evidence that relies on an inference to connect it to a conclusion of fact, unlike direct proof like an eyewitness account. While Lewis undoubtedly authored the cruel extortion letter, financial records, witness testimonies, and travel logs indicated a solid alibi. He and his wife were verifiably living in New York during the exact time frame the tainted bottles were physically placed on the retail shelves in Illinois. Despite exhaustive interrogations and microscopic forensic sweeps of his personal belongings, authorities could find absolutely no physical evidence linking Lewis to the actual purchase, handling, or distribution of the cyanide-laced capsules. He was eventually convicted of extortion for the demand letter and sentenced to 10 years in federal prison. The murder investigation, however, hit a devastating and immovable wall. The extortionist, it appeared, was merely a callous opportunist exploiting a national tragedy for financial gain, leaving the true killer hidden in the shadows. Forced to pivot, the task force cast a wider net, re-examining disgruntled pharmaceutical employees, local shoplifters, and known individuals with severe psychiatric histories. They heavily investigated a man who worked at a suburban warehouse where some of the local Tylenol supply was briefly stored before distribution. However, his DNA and fingerprints yielded no match to the trace evidence found on the compromised packaging. Every promising investigative avenue eventually dissolved into dead ends and frustrating ambiguities. For the grieving families of the 7 victims, the absence of justice left a gaping, unhealed wound. They were forced to navigate their sudden, catastrophic loss in the glaring, unforgiving spotlight of an international media circus. Their private mourning was constantly interrupted by the haunting knowledge that the person who shattered their lives remained free. The perpetrator was still walking among the very public they had so effortlessly and callously terrorized. The psychological toll on the broader Chicago community and consumers worldwide was equally profound and long-lasting. A simple headache now carried the terrifying, irrational weight of potential mortality. The fundamental trust between consumer and manufacturer, the unspoken assumption that a sealed product purchased at a local store was inherently safe, had been irrevocably shattered. The everyday mundane act of opening a medicine cabinet now required a conscious moment of hesitation and inspection. The investigation, while failing to capture the phantom killer, acted as a powerful, undeniable catalyst for sweeping systemic change. In direct response to the Unsolved Murders, the FDA mandated strict new regulations requiring tamper-evident packaging for all over-the-counter medications. This revolutionary shift involved implementing multiple layers of protection, such as foil seals across the bottle opening, shrink bands around the cap, and individual blister packs. These measures were designed specifically to make any unauthorized interference immediately visible to the end consumer. The federal government also took decisive, unprecedented legislative action to deter future acts of consumer terrorism. In 1983, the United States Congress overwhelmingly passed the Federal Anti-Tampering Act, making it a severe federal offense to maliciously tamper with consumer products. The legacy of the 7 Chicago victims became permanently etched into the protective seals of nearly every consumable good, medication, and food product sold around the world today. Yet beneath the layers of new protective foil and plastic, the core mystery persists, defying decades of remarkable advancements in forensic science. In the early 2000s, the FBI formally reopened the cold case, driven by the hope that modern DNA extraction techniques might finally yield a genetic profile from the surviving evidence. Technicians meticulously swabbed the retained Tylenol bottles, the original extortion letter, and related artifacts, searching for microscopic biological clues left behind by the killer's hands. The renewed scientific effort generated quiet whispers of a potential breakthrough among law enforcement circles, but the ultimate results remained frustratingly inconclusive. The relentless passage of time, coupled with the less stringent, rudimentary evidence-handling protocols of the early 1980s, had severely degraded whatever fragile genetic traces might have once existed. The physical evidence was simply too compromised. The Phantom of Chicago retained their impenetrable anonymity, defeating the best tools of modern science. James W. Lewis remained a peripheral person of interest until his death in 2023. Throughout his life, he routinely and vehemently denied any involvement in the actual poisonings. In a bizarre twist, he even offered unsolicited, speculative advice to law enforcement over the years on how the true killer might have operated. His death extinguished one of the very last tangible links to the original investigative frenzy, leaving cold case detectives with a profound sense of unresolved history. In the absence of a definitive culprit, alternative theories continue to circulate endlessly within the true crime community and among retired investigators. Some independent researchers suggest the widespread tampering might have been an elaborate, horrific cover for a targeted assassination. In this scenario, one specific victim was the intended target, with the other 6 serving merely as tragic collateral damage designed to obscure the killer's true, personal motive. Other analysts hypothesize the culprit was a deeply disgruntled pharmaceutical worker or a rogue chemist seeking to inflict maximum financial and reputational damage on the corporation itself. However, none of these hypotheses have ever been substantiated by concrete, verifiable evidence. The sheer randomness of the victims, connected only by their tragic misfortune to purchase a specific product in a specific geographic window, remains the most terrifying and paralyzing aspect of the unsolved crime. The 1982 Chicago Tylenol murders stand as a grim, immovable milestone in American history. It remains a definitive case study in corporate crisis management, a pivotal turning point in global public safety, and a haunting reminder of the unpredictable darkness that can infiltrate the most mundane aspects of daily life. The protective seals we casually tear away today are, in essence, quiet, everyday monuments to the 7 lives stolen in Illinois. Somewhere deep within the dusty annals of cold case files, the true identity of the poisoner remains securely locked away. The meticulous orchestration of the crime suggests a chilling, methodical intellect, a predator who vanished back into society as seamlessly as they appeared. The pharmacy shelves are undoubtedly safer now, fortified by layers of plastic and foil. But the terrifying question of who walked those Chicago aisles with death in their pockets remains forever unanswered.